In the months after Boris Johnson's resignation as Foreign Secretary, he was a pretty lonely figure around the House of Commons. You'd see him just sort of wander through. Nobody would walk up to chat to him, anything. You wouldn't have known that today. MPs were packing into his launch. Some of them, no doubt, because they're dewy-eyed admirers, but some of them, I have to tell you, because they think there's a bandwagon, and some of them will tell you quite easily and freely, privately, that they have enormous reservations about the candidate that they're backing. His people felt that this limited exposure to questioning went fine, though one of the aides to him joked to me afterwards that they were going to lock him up in the Venezuelan embassy now and not risk any more of that. The other candidates are still defining themselves against him. Sajid Javid, the last to launch, actually referred to Boris as yesterday's news. The other big thing happening here, though, was, as you said, the vote that was happening. Labour and other opposition parties and Tory rebels rather sprang this on the government, and they feel, most of the people who are involved in this, that this wheeze was possibly, probably even, the last chance that Parliament had to start a process that could stop no deal. It's just possible there's another wheeze that can come up. Maybe the Speaker could invent something, but a lot of them who were backing this felt that it was the last chance. It failed, and with it, that failure, probably comes an increased chance, many think, of an early general election, certainly an increased chance of no deal. Here's how another extraordinary day here went.
Come back.
His opponents joked he'd been under house arrest, kept from scrutiny. The great communicator. His campaign team didn't trust a campaign.
Stop Brexit!
They shut that window pretty quick.
Are you coming in, Nicky?
Certainly not.
A Michael Gove supporter walked past outside. Inside, scores of MPs, dominated by familiar pro-Brexit faces, but some who voted Remain as well, all calculating Boris Johnson was their party's best chance.
After 3 years and 2 missed deadlines, we must leave the EU on October the 31st. We can get Brexit done and we can win. We can unite our country and our society.
His team knows this candidate has many questions to answer.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm told we're going to have 6 questions from representatives of the media. Well, that's a huge number.
Do you regret any of the mistakes that you've made in your political and your personal life?
Do I do what I promise I'm going to do as a politician? Yes. That's the issue that you legitimately raise, Paul. And the answer to that is yes. You look at what we did in City Hall.
Already in this campaign, you're telling some supporters you'll do everything to avoid leaving the EU without a deal, and others that you gladly would do that. It's a simple question. If you want to be Prime Minister, can the country trust you?
You think that I've been somehow inconsistent. I mean, somehow inconsistent, Laura, in saying that I don't want a no-deal outcome, but I think it is right for our great country to prepare for that outcome.
On the very day the EU repeated there would be no renegotiation of the divorce deal agreed with Theresa May, he said, under him, there would be.
I think they will rapidly come to see that they have a new government with a new mandate, a new earnestness, a new determination to get things done, a new optimism and a new confidence about what Britain can do. And I think they will respond to that. And I think there will be a symmetrical enthusiasm on the other side of the Channel about getting this thing done and moving forward.
People who have worked closely with you do not think you're fit to be Prime Minister.
Well, Beth, I'm delighted that many of my former colleagues seem to dissent from that view. But
he knows some of those cheering in the room are late joiners who hope they're backing the winner. All know he is a choice that comes with risk.
Well, people will wonder, as you saw him close up working in London, the reason you didn't support him in the first place might be because you're not entirely sure he's up to it.
Not necessarily. No, I don't think that's true at all.
Not
I think that would be the wrong
necessarily.
assumption. My view is I saw, as I've said before, what he's capable of achieving in London.
I'm not overwhelmed by that support. You're another Tory MP hitting the panic button, aren't you?
No, I'm not. No, absolutely not. No.
You were a big Theresa May backer.
I'm a big Boris backer.
Yes, but he betrayed her, he undermined her, and now you're backing Boris.
I don't think he betrayed her. I think we need Boris right now. Boris is the man for
You're
this
hitting
country.
the panic button, aren't you? You're not really sure about him at all.
Certainly not.
You're
Certainly
a Theresa
not.
May man. You don't
I've been
trust
a friend.
Boris.
I've been a friend of Boris for many years. He'll be a great Prime Minister.
The reality is that he's saying 31st of October, and I think that is the deadline.
And you 100% trust him?
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
We will be out on the 31st of October.
I have had several meetings with him personally.
Yeah, but there are other people who've had meetings. He seems to be saying something slightly different.
No, sorry, Gary. No, I'm not buying into that one. I form my judgment according to what I observe, what I ask.
Tell you what, if he becomes PM, I'll eat my hat.
We're going to go for a drink. You're going to eat your hat if Boris becomes Prime Minister.
If he becomes Prime Minister, I'll eat my hat.
Have a quick look.
Beyond Brexit, what does the Treasury Minister, some think he's lining up for the job of Chancellor, think? Boris Johnson's talk of lavish tax cuts for higher earners.
All of the plans that Boris has announced have been fully costed.
I'm not sure that's
and fit
right.
within our fiscal headroom.
They're not remotely
costed.
costed.
Well, Gary, I'll be very happy to come on your show in due course and explain it.
They're not costed at all.
They are costed.
Where?
Well, for example, the plans
He talks about raising the higher rate.
Yes.
He hasn't got the money for that.
That costs £9 billion. That fits within our fiscal headroom.
Plunged into the middle of the Tory leadership contest, a critical vote in the Commons. Opposition parties with Tory rebels trying to find a way to stop the next Prime Minister leaving the EU with no deal.
It might even improve the quality of the leadership debate going on in my party, which needs to be improved, if we actually force some reality into the exchanges of the extremely distinguished candidates.
One Tory said if this attempt failed and the next Prime Minister tried to exit with no deal, he would join Labour and back a general election.
If we get to a point where a Prime Minister is intent on doing this, the only way of stopping that Prime Minister will be to bring down that Prime Minister's government. And I simply have to say here and now, I will not hesitate to do that.
The noes to the left, 309.
The government victory means the Brexit options narrow. It also meant a late start for the final leadership contenders' launch.
Now, this is a phrase that I've not used very often, but he's the man for me. Ladies and gentlemen, Sajid Javid.
Yeah, Boris Johnson is yesterday's news, right? In that he's been around in politics for a while, he's achieved a lot, and he's probably, he's still got a big role to play. But I think if we are trying to connect with the next generation and move forward as a country, then I think it's time for the next generation with a bold new agenda.
His pitch: you need a leader not drenched in Brexit, an outsider like Margaret Thatcher. Not the man so many in the party are rushing towards right now.
Well, joining me now is Boris backing Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg. When Boris Johnson says that he wants to take the UK out of the EU on October the 31st, deal or no deal, do you trust him?
Yes, absolutely.
Even though today he softened a little, didn't he? He said he's not aiming for a no deal. Did that give you pause for thought?
No, because that's my view as well. I've never thought that no deal is the optimal answer. I think a deal would be better. But the key comment that he made, to my mind, was that if you kick the can, you kick the bucket. And kicking the can down the road is no longer an option. If we don't leave on the 31st of October, people will feel completely let down.
And if we don't leave on October the 31st, Boris Johnson should quit as Prime Minister, if indeed he is Prime Minister by then.
Well, he got asked that question at his launch, and it seemed to me to ask somebody when they're going to resign before they've got the job is a little bit eccentric.
Sure, but you'd expect him to deliver on that promise, and if he doesn't, there'll be consequences.
Look, I'm completely confident he will deliver on that promise. I think the consequences of not delivering aren't about Boris. They're about trust in politics, they're about the electability of the Conservatives, and what would happen in an ensuing general election.
So let's talk about trust then. Can you really trust someone who's been sacked from a front bench job for lying, who's been sacked from a job in journalism for fabricating a quote? Can that person be trusted with the highest office in the land?
Oh yes, I think picking on a journalistic extravagance when he was a very young journalist is
fabricating a quote.
Look, if he'd done that when he was editor of the Times and he was 50, it would be really serious. But it was a sort of gossip column style story. It was fundamentally trivial.
And he lied to the previous Tory leader, Michael Howard, about an affair?
Well, I think people are entitled to keep their private life private. I actually don't think you're entitled to ask people questions about their private lives. I think it's deeply intrusive. It's nobody else's business. and that if he's asked an unfair question, then I don't think the answer carries consequences with it. So I trust him on policy, and I trust him on the ability to be a fine Prime Minister for this country.
The problem is so often his professional conduct seems to mirror his personal conduct. So when he says today, you know, some plaster comes off the ceiling when I say the wrong thing, actually people's lives are sometimes buried under that debris, aren't they?
No, that's not quite what he says. I think you're quoting him unfairly.
He said plaster comes off the ceiling when he picks the wrong phrase.
Not when he says the wrong thing, because he uses phraseology that is descriptive and which voters hear and it cuts through with. There are a lot of grey politicians around. There are politicians like me who always use boring phraseology as our sort of professional attribute. But Boris doesn't do that, and that's why voters like him, because his phrases get through.
Okay, so judge him on the terms you've set out, judge him on what he achieved at the Foreign Office, where his number two, Sir Alan Duncan, has said that clearing up after him was quite a full-time activity. He was known as the pooper scooper.
But Sir Alan's never been a fan of Boris Johnson. That's a highly prejudicial comment. But what did he achieve? He achieved an enormously successful Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, one of the most successful in modern times, and most importantly, he succeeded the near destruction of the Russian spying network globally.
And a British-Iranian woman, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, languishes in jail, in part because Boris Johnson misspoke.
You crucially say in part. Mrs. Ratcliffe...
Well, he contributed, you accept that?
No, I don't.
He could have got her out?
No, she couldn't have done. He tried to get her out, but the responsibility there is with the Iranian government. The Iranian government locks up an innocent woman. This is not Boris Johnson's fault. This is the wickedness of the Iranian government.
Okay, so what do you say to Nazanin's family about why she's still in jail?
She is in jail because the Iranian government is a wicked regime. And the British government has tried hard to get her out, but that it is the wickedness of the Iranian regime that keeps her in prison, not a British Foreign Secretary. Their illegality, their breaches of international law, their failure to abide by the norms of civilization, that's the problem, and it's with the Iranian government.
Okay, so you're a man of faith. Do you think that Boris Johnson has a moral compass?
I'm sure he has a clear view of what he wants to do.
That's not a moral compass.
Well, look, I'm not. It depends what you mean by moral compass. But
well,
I'm not looking for a leader of the party and of the country who is a practicing Catholic who could alternatively be in holy orders. That's not the question.
Are you looking for someone whose mistress had to have an abortion, knowing your views on abortion, where you believe that it shouldn't happen even in cases of rape and incest?
No.
Reportedly, his mistress had to go and get an abortion. Are you happy with that as a man of faith?
It is not for me to judge other people's private life. I wouldn't begin to do that. What is it?
Judge, though. Are you feeling
You are,
comfortable?
actually. You're asking me to judge Boris Johnson's private life, and I don't. People have private lives that are different from their public lives. What I trust him to do is to deliver in the public sphere. And one of the key tenets of Christianity is not to judge, that judgment will come from a higher authority in due course.
I suppose it is just the reason why I keep coming back to his personal conduct is because what people around him, people who work with him, say is that so often his professional conduct does mirror that. So, for example, on drugs, Michael Gove has been under real pressure over his past confessions over drugs. Now, Boris Johnson said in GQ magazine that he took cocaine. Do you have any concern that the man who is heading into number 10 may have committed a crime there?
Well, an ancient interview with the Gentleman's Quarterly about something that may or may not have happened when he was a 19-year-old is, I think, not relevant to what he's going to do in terms of delivering on Brexit and leading the country. And that's the key. I think people are interested in what is going to happen in future, and that Boris is the right man to lead us out of the European Union, to negotiate a settlement with the European Union, but also to bring the country together and develop policies as he did as Mayor of London.
But it's striking, isn't it? He only took 6 questions. He was asked about drugs. He didn't really answer the question. You're here very valiantly answering questions on his behalf. Why is he scared of the media?
No, not at all. Boris has been more examined, put under the microscope than any politician you can think of.
Not recently.
Hold on. We know about Boris not just over 2 or 3 days, but over 10 or 20 years. Some of the other candidates weren't household names before this campaign started, and therefore quite understandably they need to answer more questions. But with Boris, we can dig up interviews he gave in 1995 and so on, and we can go through those and try and work out the inner meanings of them, because he's so well known already.
Just because you're here in front of me, have you ever taken drugs?
No, of course I haven't. Have you?
I'm not running for office.
Oh, so that's no comment. Oh, dear.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much for joining me. Well, earlier I spoke to Sir Keir Starmer, Shadow Secretary of State for Brexit, and I began by asking him what happens now after that vote.
Well, it's obviously disappointing. It was a very important motion today because what we were trying to do is to prevent any incoming Prime Minister from taking us out of the EU without a deal, without the consent of Parliament for that, or even worse, closing down Parliament, proroguing and not letting us have a say. So we've got to regroup. This was the first opportunity, not the last.
How soon would you move to a no confidence vote in a new Prime Minister if no deal is just weeks away potentially?
Well, we're going to have to see. I mean, we're in the middle of the contest for a new Prime Minister at the moment. But we will not pull back from using any mechanism to stop us crashing out without a deal.
Several Conservative rebels voted with you, but several Labour rebels voted with the government. Should they be punished, do you think?
I'm disappointed in that. Of course I'm disappointed in that. My job, for better or for worse, is to try and work with the whole of the Parliamentary Labour Party and keep everybody together and voting as a combined unit. And I'll continue to do that. Well, that'll be a matter for the Chief Whip. I'm disappointed because...
Disappointed enough to see them lose the whip?
Disappointed that they didn't vote with us today, and it looks like had they voted with us today we would have won the vote, and it was a very, very important vote. But I've got enough on my plate without dealing with the job of the Chief Whip.
If you're so concerned about the risk of no deal, something that you say would be disastrous, you could have voted with Theresa May's deal, you could have avoided this cliff edge looming.
This argument that Theresa May deployed for 2 years, which is, I won't build consensus around a deal, I don't care whether the cross-parties like it or not, it's my deal or no deal, was a complete and utter failure. She failed so badly with that deal. And the argument that we should support a deal, which we thought was damaging for the country.
Yeah, not as damaging as no deal, right?
But in which case, a really bad deal should go through. I mean, what is the point in Parliament voting at all? If you're simply saying, here's something, it's got deal written at the top, it's signed off by the UK and the EU, so therefore it's a deal. You've got to vote for this even if you think it's damaging for the economy.
But wind forward to October the 31st,
What's the point of scrutiny if you're going to do that?
OK, but wind forward to October the 31st, and we're on the brink of leaving without a deal, and that's disastrous, you say. Would you then think, oh, I wish I had backed Theresa May's deal after all?
No, what we're going to do between now and then is work across Parliament, as we've been doing, across party, to take the opportunity to prevent that happening.
How important, in your view, is it that the leadership now has a clear message on going back to the people in a second referendum?
Well, obviously we're having a discussion within the Labour Party at the moment.
You've been having that discussion for years, though.
Of course, but this discussion has to take place in the right context. We're now at the end of the exercise. There's a deal that can't go through, and I think the position, actually Jeremy Corbyn said it to the PLP on Monday, that any deal must be put back to a public vote is the right way forward. We need to resolve that as a party, but we need to be clear that any deal has to be subject to this lock of a public vote, and equally clear that there has to be an option to remain.
How long are your members who want a second referendum, how long are they going to have to wait to get a clear statement from the leadership on this?
Well, I think we should move with speed.
Days?
I've made that view. Well, hopefully days, but as soon as we can. What's important is that we make the right move and that we do it in a united way, because if we're going to win votes here, we've got to make sure the whole of the Labour Party is going to vote together. So we've got to move that debate on. We've got to get to this position, I think, of a public vote on any deal, and we've got to make the case that Remain is an option. But we've got to do it in a united way, and if we can get to the right position, I'm very happy for a bit of time to allow that to happen.
How frustrating is that for you personally?
Well, I try not to get frustrated. When you're trying to hold different elements of the party together, it can be frustrating. I often joke that I'm going to build a wall in my office so that I can knock my head against it on a regular basis without the need to go outside.
Keir Starmer, good luck with that wall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now is Tory leadership hopeful and International Development Secretary Rory Stewart. If leaving without a deal is a fairy story, as you put it, why didn't you vote to block it today?
Because today was Labour taking control of the order paper, which basically means destroying our constitution. The way that the government runs the country is by controlling the business of the House.
You said you would vote to block no deal, and then you didn't. I mean, you can't feel that strongly about
This wasn't a vote to block no deal. This was about Labour asking for a blank cheque to organise the business of government. That's a completely different thing.
And there might not be another chance. If there was, would you vote to block no deal?
The way to stop no deal is to vote for me as Prime Minister, right? I'm standing...
That might not happen.
So I'm standing democratically to say I am totally opposed to no deal.
We don't get a vote for that. So what can you say to people out there who are worried about no deal? What part will you play as a parliamentarian?
Write to your Member of Parliament, particularly if it's a Conservative Member of Parliament, and ask them to vote for me. If you want to stop no deal, you have to get a Prime Minister who will put their energy behind stopping no deal. And I am the only candidate who is saying no deal is going to be damaging, no deal is going to be catastrophic, and no deal isn't anything. It's a failure to reach a destination.
So between now and October the 31st, will you join any other cross-party attempts to block no deal?
I absolutely would, but I don't think I'll have to, because I believe in the members of the Conservative Party. I believe that I can become Prime Minister, and if I'm Prime Minister, then things become much more straightforward, because I'm completely against no deal, and if I were lucky enough to be elected as Prime Minister, I'm elected on a manifesto which is completely about stopping no deal. The best way of stopping no deal, right, is not to engage in strange parliamentary manoeuvres. It is for a government to take no deal off the table, and that's what I would do as Prime Minister.
But you have said that you wouldn't join Labour in a vote of no confidence in a government run by Boris Johnson.
No, I wouldn't, because I don't think this is about party politics. It's about the no deal. Parliament can very easily stop it being the legal default. The only reason why no deal is the legal default is the law-making body, Parliament, made it the legal default, so Parliament can unmake it the legal default. But the most straightforward way of doing it is a Prime Minister who is against no deal.
You've made that very clear, but how much confidence would you have in a government run by Boris Johnson?
Well, he's not my kind of leader. I've made it clear that his policies are not policies that I agree with, so I couldn't serve in his government.
You've been going up and down the country, speaking to people any way you can, answering lots of questions which Boris Johnson notably didn't do today, launching in a circus tent and so on, very different. But are you actually running for the right party? Are you appealing to the right people? Because you're in danger of getting knocked out in this first vote tomorrow.
So it's a very good challenge, because of course it's true. The people I'm appealing to, and I'm completely outpolling Boris and all the other candidates with 18 to 45-year-old voters, with people who live in London, with people who live in Scotland.
Who don't have a vote for you tomorrow.
With people who voted for us in 2015 but didn't in 2017. My message to Conservatives, though, is that's not something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. If people in the centre ground of British politics would like to vote for me, are prepared to vote Conservative if I'm the leader, that's something to embrace, because to change this country, make it a better place, make it a happier place, we need to win an election, and winning an election is about votes.
But Boris Johnson made a pretty coherent pitch today that he was a winner. He beat Ken Livingstone in London when the Tories were 17 points behind. You are in danger of getting knocked out tomorrow. He would say you're a loser.
I am in danger of doing that, but we're in a different world now. I'm afraid to say that the Boris now campaigning for a no-deal Brexit, and that's basically what he's doing. He's saying he'd renegotiate by the 31st of October, but he knows, like you and me, that there's no way you're going to get a different deal out of Europe by the 31st of October. So basically he's saying he's trying to leave on no deal on the 31st of October, is promising something he can't deliver, will alienate the entire centre ground of this country, and if he were to pull it off, which I'm not sure he even could pull it off, but if he were to pull it off, I think there will be deep economic harm, and then there will be a lot of angry people blaming him. So the idea that he could win an election, I think, is wrong.
Very briefly, does his personal conduct bother you, or do you think that personal life is personal?
Well, I think personal life is completely personal. I mean, I never touch his personal life or anybody's personal life, but I also believe politics is about principles, about ideas. It's about calling people out, and I do want to know, will he or will he not lock the doors of Parliament? Will he prorogue Parliament? What kind of tariff rates does he want for the motor industry or agriculture? These are not personal attacks on him. This is saying, this is a serious job you're going for. This is a serious country. You're standing to be Prime Minister. Tell us what your policies are.